continue with learning Samuel Taylor Coleridge and his critical works. This is where we stopped. So first of all, we understood Coleridge not merely as a poet and a writer, but also as a critic, especially a critic of the Romantic Age that started the trend of intuitive understanding of literature and life. So here, speaking of his nature of criticism and a little bit about his plagiarism, plagiarism as in all the accusations laid upon him by the writers of his age, who insisted that he did not have an original thought to share with the entire literary community. So here we saw how he seemed to have borrowed from Schelling and Kant and Lessing and Schiller, all of those German philosophers, prodigiously, rather religiously, yes. So speaking of his critical works, one of his most famous work, Biographia Literaria, which we are going to look at a little more closely in this particular lecture, or maybe in the succeeding lectures. Biographia Literaria, Lectures on Shakespeare and Milton, The Friend, and The Table Talk. These were his major critical works. As far as his Biographia Literaria is concerned, it is one of his major critical works published in his lifetime. So, unlike other writings, some of his writings that were just left to be posthumously published, this one was published during his lifetime. It's a collection of fragments of his philosophical musings. It's not merely, it's not a complete work as in made with one particular set of ideas. It's a collection. It's a collection of ideas randomly picked up. So some of it may be literary in nature, some of it philosophical, and some are pure anecdotes. See, there were autobiographical anecdotes, criticism on Wordsworth, his famous tenets of criticism, all of it, right? Basically, these three seem to be his major philosophies of criticism. First, reconciliation of opposites, man and nature. How man and nature are at the polars, at the opposite poles, and how they seem to be reconciled. Okay, reconciled at one point in the middle. In the middle, as in probably literature or poetry. That's where man and nature can come into a tandem and an agreement of sorts. Again, imagination is this modifying and shaping power. See, we all have a certain amount of imagination in us. We tend to imagine things that are not quite apparent, but still are quite possible, probable. Sometimes we go into the realms of improbability, where imagination takes bounds and leaps and cooks up things that are not merely impossible, but absolutely improbable, right? So you see, now Coleridge makes this very fine distinction between fancy and imagination. Now, fancy seems to be something that we all possess. All of us fancy. All of us tend to think or imagine, right? So you may just look at a cloud and you may imagine a particular shape, right? I mean, that's quite possible. Anyone with a too practical a bent of mind will actually say it's just a cloud. Come on, it's just a fluff of moisture, precipitate matter. That's all you would say. But a person with imagination, especially children, when you look at children, they would point out, Mom, look at that. It looks like an elephant. That looks like a dragon, right? They tend to imagine. So Coleridge believes that we all have the ability to fancy, to imagine to some extent. But there is another set of, another category of people who are capable of imagining at a larger scale, where you can imagine beyond the realms of possibility. Now look at Kubla Khan or Christabel for that matter, or even, Rime of the Ancient Mariner for that matter. You would find that he goes beyond the realms of possibility. Ice caves, but there is still sun shining in it. Caves in which, can you imagine a cave that is sunlit? Well, you would find it in Kubla Khan. See, he goes beyond the realms of imagination. He goes to the beyond the realms of the normal imagination that we have, and And he believes that this imagination has the modifying or shaping power. Okay, modifying or shaping power in the sense we get the raw material from the things around us, from the world around us, from what we see. Okay, and what we see can be transformed, can be modified and shaped and made to go beyond ordinary imagination. So that's where his belief, his trust in the mental ability of the poet is that the poet is capable, any poet, any good poet, any brilliant poet is capable of imagination. And this big imagination with all capital letters, if you can imagine it, with all capitals, this huge imagination is the sole reason how, you know, a normal event could be modified, could be shaped into a supernatural event. A natural event could be turned into a supernatural event, right? A normal event could be turned into an extraordinary event, right? That's what poetry is supposed to do. A poetry is not supposed to simply tell you things as they are, you know. That would be simply be prose. Poetry is supposed to make you feel and think, and think beyond the realms of possibilities. It should be made to, you should be able to feel more, you should be able to think more. That's what poetry is supposed to do. And Coleridge believes that if you have this, high imagination, superior imagination, you would be able to, create wonderful poetry, good poetry. Now, organic wholeness of poetry, it's another one of his philosophies. Again, we'll be discussing at length at a later point. But for now, just suffice to say, when we speak of organic whole, what we are saying, what we are indicating is that it is, it is created together. Created together as in, like, or even if they are two separate things, when you mix them, it becomes one whole, so that you cannot remove it, you cannot separate it from one from the other. Now here, this point, this organic wholeness of poetry, he speaks in the context of form and content. Okay, I've not mentioned it here, but please make a note of it somewhere. Form and content, as in, form is supposed to be composed of two things. One is the content, as in what it tells you, right? Content. Content is what it tells you. Now form would be form would be what, how it is told. Okay, what form it takes, the physical form. Okay, it could be in terms of the number of lines, or it could be in terms of the syntactic structure of the verses, or it could be or it could be meter, or it could be rhyme, it could be rhythm, it could be the external features. I'm talking about the external features, how the idea is cloaked in words, in a verse, in stanzas. Whether it, see, for instance, there are limericks. They are very short, pithy, funny sometimes poems. Again, haiku again, they are very specific in terms of form. I'm speaking of form. Or even sonnet, 14 lines, right? Very specific. Or even, see, haiku is separated in terms of syllables, whereas sonnet is separated in terms of lines. And again, each there are plenty of forms available to you, pre-made forms, and the ones that you can actually create yourself. So the forms are available, the content, it would be something of your choice, and you put those contents within the form. You use the form to to bring out the content, right? So what Coleridge believes is that these two cannot be separated, or these two cannot be mechanically mixed. Mechanically mixed is as in, like, you cannot take one part and another part and you mix it together, and you would still be able to identify two different parts. That's not how it works. In poetry or in any literary work, form and content has to go hand in hand. They have to go together. Definitely they have to go together. Okay, so for instance, consider this. For instance, salt and sugar, or maybe you pour some sugar in water. Okay, water that is not of a normal room temperature water. Don't mix it, or even if you try to mix it, just stir it a little bit, 1 or 2 stirs. Will the sugar dissolve in water? Absolutely not. So the sugar would stay at the bottom and the water would be at the top. Consider oil and water. The same goes for oil and water as well. Oil would stay at the top and water would go down, right? Or is it the other way, other way around? Anyway, or consider this other option. You take a glass of water, any normal room temperature water, put some salt in it. Okay, put a teaspoon of salt in it, just mix it once. The salt dissolves, right? You cannot separate, you cannot separate it unless and until there is some special process to desalinate the water, right? Agreed? So it has become one organic whole, as in it becomes one whole that cannot be separate. That's how poetry, form and content in poetry should work. It should become an organic whole. It should not be able to, you should not be able to separate it at all. At no cost would you be able to separate it. All right, that's what he means by organic wholeness in poetry. We'll be talking about it further later on, but for now this should suffice. So imagination as a modifying and shaping power. There is, all poets have this modifying power in them, which is crucial for creating poetry. And reconciliation of opposites, as in how man and nature seem to come together in one point at one point. That is what these are his major philosophies. There are other ideas as well embedded in his writings, but these three seem to resonate very frequently. Now, coming to Coleridge as a poet himself, so this is his idea of just a glimpse of him as a critic. But as a poet, Coleridge, like Wordsworth, believed that a poet and his poem were one and the same. So you see, what you write is who you are. That was his idea. Again, compare him to T.S. Eliot. When you speak of T.S. Eliot, he would say that the writer is separate from the writing, from his writing. Okay, but as far as Coleridge is concerned, just like Wordsworth, his friend, at one point, they both believed that a poem cannot exist without a poet, and of course, that's why the poet is what his poem is. Okay, they are one and the same. And a poet's imagination, the chief amalgam that unifies all into one, is the essential quality required for all poets. A true poet is a whole man, ideal, sensible, and wise, well endowed with knowledge, experience, and intuition. So if you're going to be a true poet, you have to, what do you need? You need to be sensible. First of all, you cannot, even though you can use imagination, even though you can, yes, you can, even though you can use imagination, even though you can use all sorts of hyperbole and exaggeration and be as incongruous as possible, but within the limitations of sensibility. Again, a poet has to be an ideal man. Ideal is see the spelling, IDEAL, which is very different from an IDLE man. Okay, what's the difference? Idle and ideal. An idle man is someone who is useless, who is doing nothing. Okay, so we are not talking about an idle man, because generally there is this popular misconception among people that only an idle man would be able to create poetry. Someone who has nothing better to do with his life turns into a poet. I have. Yeah, my kids are laughing. I'm sorry. It's not me. So a true poet is supposed to be an ideal man. Ideal man, as in he has to have a perfect idea. Remember Plato and Aristotle and all those classical writers who believed that the idea is of paramount importance. Right? I keep getting distracted. Please excuse. So it is the idea that is of importance. I mean, beyond the real, the idea is something that is more perfect than what is real. So a poet is supposed to be ideal. I mean, he has to have the ideal qualities of, he has to be the best kind of man, the best idea of a man, the best idea of of a sensitive soul, because that's what romantic poets are concerned with, right? Sensitivity to man, sensitivity to nature, to things around them, to every single living or non-living object in their vicinity. So a true poet is a whole man, as in he has to be a complete man, he has to be an ideal man, he has to be sensible and wise, and well endowed with knowledge. He has to be, endowed, well endowed. He should be full of knowledge, experience, and intuition. He should not merely have studied, he should not merely must have studied, but he should also have experienced life. Merely just sitting in one corner of the world, you cannot experience the entire world. Of course, it was quite contrary, this idea is quite contrary to some other writers who never left their homes, like was yeah, consider Emily Dickinson for that matter. She never left her home, she never interacted with people, she never had any experiences, but still she managed to come up with hundreds and hundreds of brilliant poems we still read, right? Or even consider Jane Austen for that matter. The kind of not poetry, but the kind of writing she does seems to encompass the very soul of human nature, and also all the the varied kinds of people she came across. She seems to have just simply put souls into them in her writing. And also consider this Charlotte Bronte for that matter. Yes, she did travel a little bit, but not much. And her experience is comparatively very, very short, as opposed to writers like Wordsworth or Coleridge, who traveled all over Europe and interacted with the French writers, German writers, or the the various other writers for that matter. So see, experience does not equate you know the time span, lifespan of a person, nor the physical movement of that person. Experience would be how deeply one thinks, yeah, how complex a person's thought process is, how capable is that person of being sensitive to the people or the things around him, or the events around him or her. And intuition, now this is something that cannot be bought, borrowed, or stolen from anywhere, because intuition is something that is inbuilt. So he has to have a world of experience and intuition. See, intuition is something that is inborn, within every person. Sometimes what happens is, through circumstances, through certain situations in life, we tend to ignore our intuitive voice. But a poet has to have a far deeper connection to his intuition. He has to trust his instincts, right? He has to believe in what is whispered in the soul, right? So this intuition is supposed to be inborn. And a good poet for that matter, an ideal poet for that matter, is supposed to be whole man, is to be ideal, he has to be sensible, he has to be wise, and also well endowed with knowledge, experience, and intuition. Please bear this in mind. The poet described in ideal perfection brings the whole soul of man into activity with the subordination of faculties to each other. He diffuses a tone and spirit of unity that blends and fuses each into each by that synthetic and magical power called imagination, right? So a poet is supposed to be, he is an ideal perfection who brings the soul of man into activity with the subordination of faculties to each other, right? Subordination of faculties to each other, as in thought, feeling, all the faculties has to be brought into in sync with each other. He diffuses a tone and spirit of unity that blends. There has to be a unified being. The poet has to be united with his poem. The thought has to be united with the feeling. The form has to be united with its content. Every single thing should be blended together. It has to be, the practicality and the realms of impossibility, improbability should come together. They should be fused. They should not merely be placed one beside another. It has to be fused in sync with each other by that synthetic and magical power called imagination. Now see, he calls imagination a magical power, a synthetic power. Synthetic power would be something that synthesizes both, two components, So this imagination is supposed to have that kind of power that brings both together. All right, I'll stop for today, and inshallah, hopefully, we'll continue with fancy and imagination at length. We'll discuss it at length tomorrow. For now, this is all. Thank you so much. Stay safe, be happy. Assalamu alaikum.